Howdy folks, hope you all had a good weekend, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles, where this week, continuing the extremely intermittent tradition of only accepting sponsorships from products that I do actually use myself and would be entirely happy to recommend to you, this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles is sponsored by the password manager, Nordpass. If you go to nordpass.com/jingles, or just click the link down below in the video description, and use the code JINGLES, you can get 74% off a 2-year Nordpass premium plan. Plus, you do get an additional 4 months for free. This deal, only available for a limited time. And being deadly serious here for a moment, if you are not using a password manager in this day and age, you are begging for trouble. I mean, I never used to use a password manager. I didn't think I needed to because I remembered all of my passwords. Which was easy because I only ever used the same 2 passwords for about 15 years. Cheerfully going through life completely and blissfully unaware of just exactly how many websites I'd been using one of the same 2 passwords on. And then I didn't have to imagine it because Google got hacked and it turned out 174 different websites had been compromised as a result of my storing my passwords on Google Chrome using their autofill option. Which horrified me for 2 reasons. The first and most obvious one, because you can bet that whoever got that data put it on sale to the highest bidder, which meant that whoever ended up with it had at least 50% of all of my logins. And could probably make an educated guess that anybody using that same email address was probably using one of those 2 same passwords on everything else that wasn't stored in Google's databases. And the other reason I was horrified was at the idea of having to go through 174 different websites and change all of my passwords and login details. But, well, with a password manager, you don't. It takes care of it all for you. In fact, you don't even have to go through that whole process in the first place, because if you're using a password manager, all of your passwords and logins are safe and encrypted and not entrusted to the likes of Google. And aside from the security implications, the other big factor here, of course, is ease of use, because that's the reason why we use the same password for 15 years and leave it in the care of Google Chrome, because it's easy to do it that way. But it's just as easy to let a password manager take care of everything for you. You don't have to come up with 174 different passwords and logins. The password manager takes care of it for you, allowing you to have peace of mind on multiple different devices, and also monitoring the dark web for any mention of the details that you use to log in to determine whether or not there's been another data breach before anybody else is even aware of it. So, I'm entirely happy to recommend Nordpass. It's the password manager that I use, and if you go to nordpass.com/jingles, or just click on the link in the video description and use the code JINGLES, you'll get 74% off a 2-year Nordpass premium plan, plus an additional 4 months for free. Remember, this deal is not going to last forever. Grab it while it's hot. Meanwhile, back to the raging dumpster fire that is World of Warships, I suppose, although at this stage in the game's development history, a raging dumpster fire is just par for the course where wargaming's public relations seem to be. Is anything going to change? I strongly doubt it. Does this mean we're all basically wasting our time and breath complaining and trying to raise awareness? Yeah, very probably. I mean, as I said in last week's video, where I went into the whole subject in greater detail, and I'm not going to be spending this entire episode of Mingles with Jingles going into the subject in greater detail, but, well, the people who care about World of Warships are not the people that Wargaming cares about. We all think that voting with our wallets and not spending any more money on World of Warships until Wargaming change their ways is going to make Wargaming change their ways, and we're wrong. We're all labouring under the misapprehension that simply declaring that we are not going to spend any more money on World of Warships and refusing to log in and play World of Warships until the developers start addressing the actual issues is actually going to make the developers start addressing the actual issues. But we're completely misunderstanding one very basic fact here. Wargaming is not afraid of player turnover. It's not afraid of churn in the player base, because churn and player turnover is Wargaming's monetization strategy. They genuinely do not care about existing players, because there's only so many times they can sell you a USS Texas. Once they've sold you one, they can't sell you another one, can they? I'm sure they'd much prefer, of course, if we all remained paying customers, but they're not that concerned if we don't, because this is part of their strategy. It doesn't involve retaining existing players. It involves recruiting new players who haven't had time yet to get sick of wargaming's shady business practices. New players that they can sell the USS Texas to, until those new players become just as cynical and jaded as we are and stop spending money. At which point, for every one of us who quits, Wargaming's recruited another 2 players. So we can all get as pissed off and upset and outraged and indignant as we like, and Wargaming will continue to mouth the same apologetic noises without actually doing anything to change their ways, because they don't need to. Some people will fall for it and stay and say, okay, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt this time. Some people won't fall for it and they'll leave and they'll stop spending money, and Wargaming don't care, because it costs them nothing to make meaningless apologies that might convince some people that they are actually serious, and it would cost them everything to stop putting everything in loot boxes. So have we really all just been wasting our time, making our opinions known, voting with our feet and our wallets? Yeah, probably. It's sad but true. We are not the players that Wargaming cares about. Most of us have already spent all of the money on World of Warships that we're ever going to. As far as Wargaming are concerned, the law of diminishing returns applies as far as we're concerned. They don't have to pay attention to us because we're not paying their bills. Which is almost certainly why we're starting to see more emphasis on recruitment rather than retention as far as World of Warships is concerned. In fact, just recently, and I don't think the timing here was suspicious at all, because these win-back campaigns are actually quite common. A win-back campaign is when, well, if you haven't played World of Warships in some time, you probably received an email from Wargaming offering you some incentives to return to the game, and there were pretty good incentives as well. Log back into the game, win 15 battles, which should only take you a couple of days even if you have the worst luck imaginable, and you will receive 2 loot box containers, one of which will contain a Tier 5 premium ship, or if you already own all of the available Tier 5 premium ships, then some gold. The other of which will contain, amongst other things, a Tier 9 premium ship, and again, if you already own all of the Tier 9 premiums on that particular shortlist, then you will receive a very large amount of gold, as well as some steel and all other kinds of good stuff. But here's the thing. If you were to respond to that email by clicking on the link, it would open up a browser web page on the World of Warships portal where you could activate and take part in that win-back campaign. But have a look at the URL at the top of the page. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Look, Wargaming, we know we're whales, but you're not supposed to call us that to our face. Man, the contempt in which this company holds its player base is absolutely legendary. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. And there's more. I suspect most of you probably haven't heard of TURY, because he's was a Russian community contributor, quite an outspoken one, notorious for his criticism of wargaming. And he was recently, I believe, actually kicked out of the Russian community contributor program for basically just going too far as wargaming were concerned. Well, anyway, not content to merely kick him out of the community contributor program, there was a code given away on the Russian language World of Warships livestream last week, I think. This is the code. It's been checked. It's a genuine code. If you have a Russian server World of Warships account, you can activate this code and get something in-game. Don't know what. Have a look at the end of the code. And remember, this code was posted just after TURY exited the CC program. And now ask yourself, do you think that code was an accident? An official code given away on an official stream, officially telling one of their former community contributors exactly what he can go and do to himself. This would have been unthinkable if it had been any other company, but it's Wargaming, so that just means it's Monday. Think about this for a minute. Not even Ubisoft or Electronic Arts stoop as low as this. Wargaming, you are being compared to Ubisoft and Electronic Arts, and you are not coming off well in the comparison. But you know what, for me, is the saddest thing about this whole situation? World of Warships is a great game. I think it's way better than World of Tanks, even though World of Tanks is way more popular. I mean, for one thing, there's no gold ammo in World of Warships. But the company behind it There seem to be literally no depths to which they will not sink in order to make a fast buck. Well, what are you going to do? And yet, you know, it hasn't been the case that Wargaming have never listened to the community. Although you can count on the fingers of one hand how many times they have actually taken community feedback into account before going ahead with something. There are any number of times the community have said this is a terrible idea and it will not work, and Wargaming have ignored us and they've just gone ahead and introduced it anyway and then found out that it was a terrible idea and it didn't work. But there has been at least one occasion where the community as a whole were pretty well united in their overwhelming condemnation of a new feature that World of Warships wanted to introduce. And they actually listened. Does anybody remember the NTC, the Naval Training Centre? It's kind of in the game now in the shape of the Research Bureau, where you can unlearn a line of ships that you've acquired and grind them out again for extra rewards that are only available in the Research Bureau. But the initial iteration, which is why they changed the name to get rid of the stigma associated with what they wanted to do with the Naval Training Centre, was going to work kind of like Paragon levels in Diablo. The basic idea was that all of the ships that you had could have their stats improved by playing them more. Obviously, a lot more. But if you were to play, for example, your Yamato and grind out experience mileposts on the Yamato, then you could make the guns even more accurate, you could make the ship faster, and so on and so on and so on. Now, the community contributors unanimously said this was an absolutely terrible idea, because you're basically just taking the best players and making their ships even better. You're increasing the gap between the Unicums and everybody else. We said the community will hate this, it's a terrible idea, please, please don't do it. You know, instead of giving stat buffs to existing ships, just give away camo skins, you know, cosmetics, things like that. People will grind for cosmetics. And Wargaming said, nope, nope, none of you know what you're talking about, this is a great idea. And we're going to announce it to the community at large, and they did. And the community at large said, this is a terrible idea. All you're doing is increasing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. You're going to have people in the same ships, but one ship is clearly better, and they're just going to ruffle stomp anybody who doesn't have the time required to grind this out. And Wargaming said, wow, we didn't see that one coming, but we told you. But as usual, they didn't listen, except on this occasion they did. But it was only in the face of the community backlash. They didn't bother listening to the community contributors. This was 2019. At that point, they hadn't listened to any of us in at least 2 years. But to their credit, they did take the criticism on board, and they completely scrapped that version of the Naval Training Centre. They brought it back and they called it the Research Bureau, but, well, I think the Research Bureau is fine. I haven't actually taken advantage of its services myself, but instead of making existing ships better, now there are certain ships that are only available through the Research Bureau. Some pretty good ships, I admit, but anybody can get them, and they won't be any better for you than they will be for somebody who spends 5 times as much time in the game as you do. They did listen. I do have to give them credit for that. Meanwhile, over in World of Tanks, it looks like the World of Tanks developers were paying very careful attention to the whole concept of the Naval Training Centre and furiously taking notes and just waiting for the right moment to introduce the exact same thing under a different name into World of Tanks. Step Forward Crew 2.0, or as certain members of the World of Tanks community are referring to it, Screw You 2.0. World of Tanks is currently tinkering, at a fairly advanced stage of tinkering, with the idea of getting rid of the whole crew system, which currently exists in World of Tanks, and replacing it more with something like you have in World of Warships. In World of Warships you don't have an entire crew for your ship, you just have a captain. And they're wanting to do the same thing in World of Tanks. Instead of having a commander, a gunner, a loader, a driver and a radio operator, they're going to get rid of all of the crew and just leave you with a tank commander. Now, if you're listening to this because you haven't really been paying attention to World of Tanks and you're thinking, well, this sounds like a good idea, it's going to massively simplify the crew system. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. You must be new here. This is wargaming we're talking about. Do you remember when they did the commander skill rework in World of Warships? The first one, not the rework of the rework, or the rework of the rework of the rework. The original commander skill rework, when they changed it from a 19-point maximum to a 21-point maximum captain. And everybody was saying, wow, I actually have a couple of 19-point captains. It won't take me long to get a 21-point captain. And then actually looked at the numbers required and realised that it took more experience to get from 19 to 20 than it did to get from 1 to 19. And forget about getting to level 21. Well, it's the same deal in World of Tanks. People are finding out that current crews that are completely maxed out, when they get converted over to this Crew 2.0 system, they're not even close to being completely maxed out. And the amount of grinding required in order to max out the new crew is astronomical. It's just completely unreasonable. But the benefits of having a completely maxed out or close to maxed out Crew 2.0 commander on your tank are massive compared to somebody who isn't there. Similarly, the amount of grinding required to get your converted fully maxed out tank commander to the Crew 2.0 fully maxed out tank commander is astronomical, even compared to the already astronomical amounts of experience required to get a World of Warships captain from rank 19 to rank 21. Now, on the one hand, I do kind of get it, because this is obviously supposed to be a time and experience sink for long-term dedicated or just really, really good, or both, World of Tanks players. Kind of like the legendary modules for tier 10 ships that you used to be able to grind out for free in World of Warships. But what we have here in Crew 2.0 and World of Tanks, if Wargaming gets their way, is something that even World of Warships didn't consider putting into the massively unpopular and soon to be cancelled Naval Training Centre. Because in World of Tanks, one of the things that you can do in order to increase the experience of your crew is use crew books, which are a consumable that basically boost the experience of a particular tank crew. Now, you can get these crew books as drops in-game, but you can also buy them for in-game credits. The thing is, you are going to require an astronomical number of crew books if you want to skip the grind and just use crew books to get your new commander all the way up to the maximum, level 80. And you can buy them for in-game credits. But there isn't a World of Tanks player in the world who has enough credits sitting on their in-game account in order to buy the number of crew books required in order to max out one of their tank commanders when Crew 2.0 goes live. But you can always buy gold and convert the gold into credits. Yeah. And if you think people aren't going to do this, think again. And it gets worse, because they also have prestige levels. Once you've maxed out, even though it isn't actually maxing out a crew member at level 80, there are a further 8 prestige levels, which require even more crew experience, which you cannot get with the use of crew books. But you can get it by converting experience on your existing tanks for a small fee. Quickie Baby did a video on this, and he calculated that in order to get the 60 million crew experience required to take a single tank commander up to the maximum possible, it would cost you slightly less than $1,900. And again, if you think that nobody is going to spend that amount of money on World of Tanks, you must be new here. It will happen, and they will have tanks that are 15% better than yours because they paid for it. Not even the World of Warships Naval Training Centre was prepared to be quite so deliberately and obviously venal as that. Although it was 2 years ago, perhaps they felt that the time just wasn't right. And on that bombshell, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it. And as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.